Okay. So I am going, right, like I said, I'm going to talk about this. Move on to the second section, the second set of slides. We had these, we had the random walk stuff and then the transformation of variable stuff that gave us a couple of ways of giving these power law size distributions. There are a vast array, but I'm going to give you, again, some of the big major ones to think about here. So this is, right, another way to get to power law size distributions. Okay, these guys. Pratchett, we've talked about Pratchett. So it's named after, it's a rich-get-richer model. I'll refer to it occasionally as Simon's model. We'll talk a lot about a couple of characters here. So Herbert Simon is often attributed, you know, it's sort of connected to this, but many other people, as I said, have kind of come up with versions of it. Famously in networks, which we'll get to later on if you've heard about scale-free networks, it's essentially this model recast in a network way. But again, a kind of rediscovery. And then we'll get to Mandebrot, who's famous for the whole fractal business and for being Mandebrot. He's a pretty opinionated character. And they had a pretty good tete-a-tete, or argy-bargy, or a little bit of a go at each other about their different theories, right? So this is going to be a competitive kind of random aggregation sort of thing, growing system. You're sort of competing for resources in some way, which will, and it's very general. And then Simon's will be an optimization thing. So there's no sense of optimization here, and there's no sense of growth here. Both of those things could be happening. So there's potential for a melange of these things. But Simon's a pretty great model. So we'll go through that first. So rich-get-richer is what I'm going to call it. You may have heard of other frames as cumulative advantage, which is to Solar Price, which was built directly on top of Simon's work, and preferential attachment, which is what people say in networks. I should bring chocolate, but I thought 8:30 a.m. Class got too big. I would distribute chocolate. Anyway, sorry. Okay, I shouldn't tell you that. No, I feel bad. I forgot to buy chocolate. Okay, the rich get richer. So this is sort of this idea, you know, this is a little version of it, but it's a pyramid scheme situation, right? So if you come kind of late to the game and we'll show how this works in various ways, then things don't take off for you. But if you're in front, then you tend to accrue riches. We will also show that because of this course, working through these things in detail, it turned out that Simon's analysis, which is a fantastic thing, and you will go through it, he has this tiny little, you know, just like almost a typo in one equation, which doesn't matter at all. But it turns out he missed a completely enormous thing, which is that the first mover in these systems potentially can grow to be enormous, right? So the first mover can be vastly, you know, we've been talking about these ZIF distributions. The first mover in these things can be right off the plot. So we'll show that. That's a paper that came out of this course. And it seems to me no one actually simulated this model. Because he worked it out in the 50s, and it's all math and so on, which is the right thing to do. But it looks like no one actually did that. And you guys get to simulate. It's a very simple, easy thing to do. As I'll explain, you can see how basic this model is. Okay, so as I said, random walks, that was it's a sort of a mechanism. It's a growth kind of thing. There's memory in it in the sense that you don't remember any of you remember all of your choices in aggregate, right? So how many heads and how many tails, heads minus tails. So you know we are right now, right? It's a Markov model. So it has this very primitive kind of memory. But the walks aren't competing with each other, right? So this is just it. We're just, as I said, yeah. So we're comparing across all these realizations. We're just allowing all of them. We're going to consider them all and say there's no real competition, right? They're not hitting each other or anything like that. So we're going to have, and you know, this is just my framing. It's again, there's a lot of randomness involved. It's an additive system, so things are growing. There's nothing you can add. You can, I shouldn't say add. You can include mechanisms to break things down or splinter things and so on. So that's another version of these things. But the elemental thing is that things can only grow, and there's emulation and copying, which is a really big part of this, right? So it turns out, I think, in general, for these really skewed distributions, there has to be some sort of copying, some sort of growth mechanism. It's hard to get to them otherwise. And so the claim has been over the time, right, that this mechanism's behind a lot of, and we'll see that it does hold up, particularly Simon's approach, for a couple of really good examples. So as words that we've looked at for books, city sizes, the web, and by the web, which is maybe not what you call it anymore, the internet. It's links in, links out to sites or to pages. Productivity, this is scientific productivity, so this is how many papers scientists produce. This is from the 1910s, I think I have another slide. Popularity, right? So again, hugely skewed distributions. Things can take off, and the Mona Lisa is the most famous painting in the world. We'll get to this later on as to why that is, why we made a terrible mistake. Harry Potter, why that's just so gigantic. But all right. Okay, so as many different mechanisms are possible for all these kinds of power laws, and so that's a problem. Or it's a feature, I should say, that the normal distribution, the central limit theorem, there's a big, beautiful story for that. There's just this one unifying thing, everything turns into normals, but we have lots of different kinds of power. They're power laws, but they have different exponents, different mechanisms can give rise to the same exponent, so we have to be careful about that. And if you have the history of how things have grown, which we have to some extent for something like the web, obviously cities and so on, we can sort of tease out, how did it grow? Did it grow in the manner of the mechanism that you're proposing? Surprisingly, people haven't done that much, right? They're like, here's a mechanism which I think is, simple. I'm going to propose it, do some derivations, I get a power law out, and I'll compare it to some real data. And if the real data has a -3 exponent, I have a -2, then that's a victory. That's a hugely wrong result, but that's kind of where we started.